Love that too. The time has come. So thank you everyone so much for joining us today for our webinar. We've got a great team collaborating together to provide you all some advice and insights on some of the current challenges and obstacles facing businesses in terms of cybersecurity today. So before we begin, some housekeeping items I want to cover with everyone. A quick introduction to myself. My name is Caroline Wood, and I work at NetGain Technologies as the marketing administrator, and I'm going to be moderating the webinar today. Questions are most definitely encouraged throughout this webinar. You can use the chat option within GoToWebinar to submit any comments or questions you might have throughout our session together today. We are going to try to answer as many of these as we can in the Q&A portion of our webinar, which is going to be towards the close of our session. A recorded version of this presentation is going to be sent to all registrants, and it's going to be made available on the NetGain website too. And we're going to send an email sharing those details within the next couple of days once we have all of those materials together. And finally, if you've got any questions after the webinar about the content or topics that we're going to be covering, please feel free to reach out. We would be more than happy to meet with you or share some additional content and information around the security topics we cover and more. So let's get this cybersecurity party started. I will begin with some general introductions to our security experts who are going to be weighing in on the topics we're covering today. We've got representatives from both NetGain Technologies and Sophos with us, and they both have solid backgrounds and experience in cybersecurity. So let's go around the room, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves, their roles, as well as a little bit about some of their background experience in terms of cybersecurity in the IT industry. So I'm going to give the floor to Dan Faltisco from Sophos first.
Thank you. So my name is Dan Faltisco. I'm a senior channel sales engineer with Sophos. Been at Sophos for about 2 years, and I've been in the cybersecurity space for over 7 years, and in IT for over 15 years. So I'm a little older, but certainly been around the block and around the cybersecurity ecosystem for a good amount of time now.
Thanks, Dan. And now I would like to introduce NetGain's very own Braxton Molton.
Thanks, Caroline. My name is Braxton Moulton. I'm the Technical Director of Security at NetGain Technologies, and I work with businesses and organizations to help improve their cybersecurity posture, whether that's through risk assessment, vulnerability assessment, or cybersecurity training.
Thanks, Braxton. Glad to have you both with us today. So now that we've introduced the team, let's move into the actual content of the webinar. Today, we're going to be exploring some of the more recent trends in cybersecurity and how small and medium businesses in particular are specifically being targeted and feeling some of the ramifications of not being prepared for some of these cybercrime activities, especially newer ones that we're seeing, in 2022 and even, over the past couple of months. So we're going to begin our session by exploring the current threat landscape to better understand what variables are at play right now and the influence that they're having on current levels of risk and awareness for cybercrime in the U.S. And abroad. We will then focus more on why small and medium businesses in particular are a target. And that's going to lead us directly into a discussion of how to weigh some of the risks and costs of cybersecurity for organizations, as well as some, key tips for what you can start doing now to better protect yourself and your business from some of these modern cyber threat actors. Finally, as I mentioned before, we're going to have some time for open Q&A where we're going to cover some of your questions and comments. So let's begin by breaking down the current threat landscape around cybercrime and what trends we're seeing for some of these various threats and notable incidents that have been impacting organizations. So Dan, I am going to give the floor to you first. The number one threat today is ransomware. So can you tell us a little bit about what this has looked like for U.S. businesses in particular?
Yeah, certainly. So you guys can obviously see from the graphic, it's taking up the most amount of time with our team from an incident response perspective, right? So we have a team at Sophos that is called the Sophos Rapid Response. These are the guys that come out and actually respond to an active incident. So this isn't like, hey, we think we might have something in our environment, or we suspect we might have a breach, right? This is, we know we have an active incident or we have an active adversary in our environment, and we need help getting them, cleaned up and kicked out, right? And so in those cases, right, and so we have the latest data we have is from the time period of 2021 to 2020 to 2021. So it's not inclusive of this year's yet, but I can tell you just by looking at and anecdotally looking at this year, it's the trend's going to continue. Ransomware is still going to be the #1 threat. It's not the only threat that we respond to, but it does make about 80% of our time as far as what we are responding to on a daily basis.
That's right, Dan, and I gotta say, it's no different over here. So from time to time, we will be called in to help assist with ransomware events, but also that does not mean it's only limited to that. We've been asked to help with potential data exfiltration, even potentially, crypto miners, and of course, miscellaneous malware is something that we deal with constantly, whether it's, a random virus that might be on a workstation or a virus outbreak even. So it's rampant, it's everywhere, it's here to stay, and we that this graph accurately portrays what we're seeing as well.
And that's kind of a nice, maybe nice isn't the right term, but it's a good transition into kind of our next point of discussion. And as Braxton just described, ransomware has been impacting, some of the businesses that NetGain has been supporting, current clients or even net new people coming to us for support. Braxton, can you detail maybe some of what these other threats are that are on the rise? Many of these, I expect people have seen in news headlines, but some may be new or maybe a bit less mainstream, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so ransomware is definitely #1, and along with email. Ransomware, why does ransomware hit so hard? Because #1, it kills the productivity of your business. You are locked out from your data, and your data is valuable. And what we're also seeing from that is they are going to be destructive with that. They will wipe away your data, and suddenly now all your business productivity is gone, and they're going to hold you to that ransom. They're going to make you pay, or try to make you pay, to get access back to that data. And then, of course, with email, we always say that the user is the weakest link in the chain when it comes to your cybersecurity program, and email directly attacks the end user. So that's why it's critical to have some sort of, cybersecurity training and awareness behind that, because that is probably the biggest attack vector that we see and we will continue to see. Very easy to automate, so it's constantly going on. There are thousands of emails probably being sent to just NetGain alone, as well as your business at any given moment. So those two combined, along with what we've kind of seen recently, at least within the last year, supply chain attacks, like Colonial Pipeline here in the United States, we were impacted, by that fuel shortage because they were hit with a cyber incident. So these things are on the rise, and because of the growing landscape, we're becoming a more and more cyber world with each passing second. It's only going to increase from here. So Dan, obviously you're in the cybersecurity space. What have you seen with these other attacks on the Sophos side?
Yeah, and you look at the last 3 data points, and what I like to say about that is those are all combined into one type of an attack. And actually, even though ransomware probably is the #1 thing that we respond to, because that's the #1 thing that's impactful to your business, what we see is in the course of doing our investigation into the organization that may have been compromised with the ransomware incident, we saw evidence of actually data exfiltration and crypto mining happening in their environment before the ransomware got launched. So we kind of term that like a double whammy or a triple whammy, if you will, right? Where the threat actor will exfiltrate data, will hold that data and try to extort you for that data, right? And this is after they launched a ransomware to cover their tracks, right? Same thing with crypto mining. They might get an initial foothold in your environment, install crypto miners, use that to monetize their access to your environment. Once it's been determined that they either have made as much as they can off of you, or they're worried that they're going to get caught, they will launch their ransomware as a way to cover their tracks. They'll do data exfiltration and launch ransomware. And it's very kitschy the way that the threat actors work. They'll offer a service back to you. So they'll be very kind of tongue in cheek about it, as it were, very old school mafia, if you were, right? They'll be like, hey, we noticed that you're locked out of your files. We managed to keep a copy of your files as a backup. Would you like access to that? Well, if you do, then here's the cost of our service, right? And so it's very, very interesting to see the way they phrase things and try to make it look like they're helping you.
Well, and as Dan mentioned, kind of with that example right there, threat actors are getting a bit savvier, if you will. I know the past couple of years we've seen kind of a transformation in the tactics of cyber criminals. Naturally, as technology evolves and advances, so too must, I guess, the methods of cyber criminals as they try to, infiltrate different networks, new technologies. So, Dan, can you talk to a couple of these newer practices that we're seeing from hackers and threat actors?
Yeah, well, we're certainly seeing the rise in what we call polymorphic malware and ransomware, meaning that every time it's deployed, it's got a new kind of signature to it, and that defeats a lot of the traditional signature-based antiviruses that exist out there. It's one of the main reasons why Sophos themselves we have moved away from being solely reliant on signature AV, and we're more on behavioral, AV now. And you see that trend going to continue, because there's no way that you can have a signature every single thing that exists. Just last year, there were over 2 billion samples of malware, because every time it was launched, it was brand new. And they couple that with more sophisticated social engineering type attacks, right? We've seen attacks, use cases and other things of, they will, launch a browser-based attack that will pop up on your screen that says, hey, we suspect your machine has been compromised. Please contact this number for support. And then they contact the support number, and they're masquerading as like Microsoft support, right? And they're trying to get you to give them access to like maybe a username and password or something like that through that. But you're talking to an actual live human being. So it's become much more much more sophisticated in an aspect. But then also on that side, and Braxton, I want you to comment on this, because you guys are at the forefront of, seeing the vulnerabilities and seeing unpatched exploits. So talk a little bit about the, the ecosystem around, the threat actors groups now that you're seeing.
Yeah, so zero-day vulnerabilities have been a plague. It feels like over the last year, at least. They've certainly been around longer than just a year, but like Google Chrome has had like 4 0 days just this year alone. We're only halfway through. A 0 day is so scary because it's either a vulnerability that the vendor didn't know, they were not aware of, or they did know and they just haven't disclosed it yet. And as a result, there's no fix for it. There's no patch. There's no workaround. So they just come up just one day, just like that, snap of a finger, and suddenly, it can be a very critical, very impactful vulnerability if exercised or exploited. And the reason that is such a struggle is because there's no one clear fix to that. That's why we preach and we try to practice a layered defense when it comes to your cybersecurity approach. But all of these things kind of work together for the threat actors. And you hear about ecosystems coming up. Like for example, ransomware it's a business. It makes money. To the point that, like Dan was talking about in the last slide a little bit, they offer services. If you get hit with ransomware and they give you their decryptor to unlock your files, if you pay. But if their decryptor doesn't work, well, they have like a service desk that you can call and work with them to make sure that their decryptor works. So it makes money and it's profitable. So you have actual live ecosystems or communities where this continues to happen and it thrives.
Scary times. I'm now going to transition our discussion towards how small and medium businesses in particular have become sort of a prime target for cybercrime and cybercriminals, especially in 2022. So Braxton, I'm going to toss this over to you. Can you detail maybe which parties or groups are kind of the main entities targeting small, medium businesses or SMBs?
Sure. So we got it kind of broken down into two groups here. And the first one I want to focus on is the APT groups, or Advanced Persistent Threat. These are large groups. They're organized, and the reason why they are that way is because they're typically funded through nation states. Because those nation states are going to be, they're going to have the resources that these APT groups require, whether it's funds or manpower and time. So they are extremely sophisticated and organized. They're using advanced tools, obviously some automation, but they're going to be highly skilled as well in what they're doing. They have that large backing of resources behind them, and what their kind of goal is, they're looking for the big fish, right? Whether that is another country or it's a major business and organization, whatever have you. It's a big player in whatever game that they're trying to break into. So they're going to be focused on things like cyber warfare, espionage, and anything that's disruptive. So you might ask yourself, and I hear this all the time, as a small to medium business, why would they care about us? They're not after us. And you're kind of half right. They're not after you. Their end goal is that big fish, like I was referring to. Like if you're a small bank, for instance, they're after Fifth Third, they're after Chase. They're not after you. But what you are to them is a link in the chain, and that chain I'm referring to is the supply chain. So when you're running your business, you're going to be connected to vendors to help provide you an application or a software or a service, and that vendor is going to be linked with other businesses that are using them. So if they can break into you and you've got some sort of hook or tie into that vendor, they might be after that vendor, and then they can get into that vendor, and then they impact them, and now you're impacted again. So and while they're in your organization, they might as well just say, hey, well, since we're in here and we've got keys to the kingdom, how about we just hit them with ransomware and make a little bit of money on the side? So they're after you for the supply chain, and you're always going to be a target, because very often I hear we're not big enough, nobody cares about us. So as a result, you might spend a little bit less in your cybersecurity budget, and that's exactly what they want. So just because that they're big and sophisticated and their end goal is a relatively big and sophisticated end goal, doesn't mean that you are not, that doesn't mean that you're invisible to them. So on the flip side of that, Dan, what else are we seeing that's a little bit kind of the opposite?
Yeah, well, it's similar in the way that they're organized, but not what we call fin groups, or financially motivated cyber criminal gangs, right? These are the organizations that probably are primarily targeting SMBs right now. They're loosely organized. They're not as sophisticated, generally speaking, as the nation states, because they don't have financial backing of a government. Some of them have some loose ties to governments, and there's some suspiciousness of, like, maybe there's some rogue agents that are working for both, right? They have a side job that's also for the financially motivated groups, especially the ones that are like Lazarus Group, which is located in North Korea, we suspect, right? You would imagine that maybe there's some tie-ins with the local government there. But they definitely operate in a different mode and a different model, because they are primarily focused on financial gain, whereas the APT groups are primarily looking at data theft, spying, or more we're seeing now with Russia and Ukraine and the whole geopolitical there with Russia and Ukraine, more disruptive attacks to kind of take down like electrical grids and things like that. But the important thing to note about that, so financially motivated groups, they're going to utilize automation a lot more than the nation states, where the nation states will specifically target somebody and they will continue to go at that until they break it. That's what advanced persistent means. Financially motivated groups, they're looking for the easy win, right? So they're going to use automation to kind of do what we call spray and pray, right? They're going to spray out an attack or look for a particular vulnerability, and they're just going to go crawl across whatever they can find to see what they get hit on. And once they get a bite, they're going to try to reel it in, right? And so that's the way financially motivated threat actors kind of operate at a macro level. But more importantly, one of the things, and the reason why we even talk about APTs and FINs in two separate groups, they piggyback off each other a lot. More importantly, we see the FIN groups piggyback off of APT group attacks. Perfect example of that is last year and the exchange vulnerability that if you're not aware of it, there was a vulnerability that was exposed in March of last year, where it was possible with on-premise Exchange to get access to an environment via a web shell. And it was initially, and we suspect, and we kind of know, it was initially created, the exploit was initially discovered from a Chinese state threat actor. But the problem with that for SMBs was, once it was out in the wild, every single fin group known to man said, hey, this looks like an easy way to make some money. We're going to go and copy that, right? So it's very easy for them to wait for a more sophisticated threat actor to find a great vulnerability and a great exploit, and then just piggyback right off of that. Makes it way more easier for them to do.
And kind of on that note, what we've been seeing in headlines, especially over the past couple of years, are definitely a lot of similar trends when it comes to cybercrime, some of these hacker groups and whatnot. And, I don't know about everyone else, but I feel like I keep seeing some of the same headlines where a new organization is getting hit with ransomware or was hacked. It's almost become kind of commonplace, unfortunately. So, why are we seeing this as a continuing trend? Dan, I'm going to toss this to you. Can you maybe describe some of the reasoning behind why companies keep getting breached?
Yeah, the reason why it keeps happening, and it's just the reality of the current and the state that it's always been with IT. Attackers are getting better, and we're still struggling to keep up. Like I said, I've been in IT for 15 years. I've been in cybersecurity for 7 years. This slide has not changed in those years. It's still the same challenges. Maybe some of the bullet points under attackers are evolving, right? That may have changed a little bit more. But the reality is there's always going to be a gap between your level of protection and what the attackers are doing, right? We call it a cat and mouse game sometimes. Is there's always going to be a new thing that they come up with that's going to hit you in an area that you weren't prepared for. So it's important for you guys to understand that there is going to be a gap. You just need to manage that. Now, Braxton, maybe you can comment a little bit more about what you're seeing from SMBs and where their IT security spend is going, why their manpower is so limited.
Yeah, well, the obvious struggle, for SMBs is that there's not a near limitless amount of funds that you can put into your cybersecurity budget. So you kind of have to work, what's the best bang for my buck? And it honestly can feel like, spending some money in cybersecurity is unnecessary, but that couldn't be further from the case. As I was saying, we're moving into a more cyber world. We're here now. If you don't think that we're there, we are already there. And it's only obviously going to increase and grow. So, having an InfoSec program or a cybersecurity program in your business is going to have to become commonplace. And some of the struggle with that is a limited budget. So, you're not going to be able to, purchase an internal SOC team that's highly skilled. Like a larger organization can, and you're not going to be able to buy the most high end, the Tesla of antivirus programs or solutions or anything like that. So you kind of have to figure out what makes sense to the SMB and what are your business needs, and then obviously try and find the perfect solution that kind of fits that goal. And it's a little bit of an uphill battle because, as Dan was kind of talking to, more automations out there. There are graphs out there, live maps on the internet that will show you the actual scans that are happening as they're happening in real time, and there are just thousands, millions of them. If you hold a public IP address, you are being scanned. That is happening, even from malicious people to non-malicious people. So it feels like an uphill battle. And you might ask yourself a little bit about, if I'm an SMB, how do I succeed? If it kind of sounds like it's there's no hope. That's not true. Really, I would ask the question is, what does failure look like? In my opinion, failure is to do nothing. So as long as you think about a cybersecurity program and what you need, and you kind of focus your budget and your business needs for what kind of controls you need to have, that is how you can continue to keep yourself secure.
Braxton, thank you. That's a great segue into our next point. what can businesses do today to understand, where they currently sit in terms of their security posture, so that they can maybe better gauge what changes they may or may not need to make to protect their people and their data. At this point, we're going to delve into a discussion of some risks versus costs and maybe how to weigh some of your options with that. So before you can make any steps towards change or improvement, life, professional, personal, or otherwise, it's important to understand whether or not there's a problem and what the opportunities are. So Braxton, guide us through some of the necessary steps that can help an organization determine maybe what security risks their businesses may be facing.
Yeah, no problem. The reality is you don't know what you don't know. That applies to almost all aspects in life, and cybersecurity is no different. We've got it broken down here in the five points, but really, if you have a risk assessment performed, that's going to help you identify all 5 of these points and where you land. So you need to understand, what's important to the business. What application software services that we provide that we need to have availability to that can't go down in order for us to be able to be profitable, to do what we need to do and make our money and continue to thrive as a business. Cybersecurity is a part of business. I often will talk to organizations and businesses. I kind of consider cybersecurity like the weird brother to IT, because a little bit obviously IT is involved, but it's also helping to understand running a business and doing that risk management. So having a risk assessment performed will help you identify, what you need to have in your business, and then obviously identify your gaps. What do you not have compared to an industry-known cybersecurity framework like Nist? That's the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And then what controls do we need to put into play to help protect us? And then what about detection, things that have changed, what's happening in real time, something that's actually actively inside our environment that we might be able to catch or continue to protect ourselves, because there's no control that's 100% foolproof. Right. So if I were to tell you that, I'd be trying to sell you snake oil. That's why we, constantly try to practice layered defense and talk about the principle of least privilege and, who has access rights and all of that. So having that risk assessment performed and getting that gap analysis done so that you can understand, where you're lacking and what controls you don't have is going to be critical too. Now, Dan, with Sophos, you deal a lot with the response and the recovery. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you might see from that side?
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, Braxton, protection is obviously a very key thing. I think that most organizations, they focus mostly on protection. Can I block this attack from happening? Can I block this application from being accessed, right? Can I, block, zero trust exists as a concept, right? Do I allow people onto my network? Do I not allow people onto my network? And that's all under the protection side. But as you can see from just looking at some of these questions, we want to look a little bit further than that to really fully understand your risks, because as Braxton mentioned, nothing's ever going to be 100% foolproof from a protection perspective. So how do you have visibility into your environment? If you do have visibility into your environment, how do you detect suspicious activity? That's stuff that kind of plays that fine line between, stuff that is good and that is bad. There's that gray area that you need to have visibility into, number one, but also need to be able to see that and stuff and go, hey, that's Bob running a PowerShell command versus that's Johnny Hacker running a PowerShell command to run a script to install malware. It's still a PowerShell script to the software that's protecting you, and you're not going to block PowerShell in your environment, because then your admins would not be able to do their job. And then on the recovery side of things, these are questions that you need to understand is how quickly can I recover? Do I test my recovery process, right? What does my recovery look like if I were to go down, and who do I need to call, right? Do I have a game plan for if something happens, and, do I have a step-by-step action plan? And if you don't have those things in place, right, the last time I guess, an environment that you want to be practicing that is when you actually have an active incident.
And on that note, in terms of, preparing and developing a security plan, especially longer term, it's important to establish a cybersecurity maturity model and plan. So Dan, something you just kind of alluded to, can you discuss what a cybersecurity maturity model is?
Yeah, so a maturity model, and this doesn't have to be anything too, too in depth. It could be as rigid as an actual certification, like a CMMC, which is the Cyber Maturity Model Certification, or it could be just yourselves looking at a spreadsheet of the questions you've answered and the risk categories that you've identified. As Braxton mentioned in the previous slide, we like to conform to Nist, right? They've already done all of the legwork as far as identifying the 5 areas and risk categories, right? The identify, protect, detect, analyze, and respond, right? Those are all part of the Nist framework. And so assessing your capabilities to that framework, understanding where you stand in each category, but then also like saying to yourselves, okay, what can I reasonably improve with the limitations that I have as an organization, and what's acceptable from a risk perspective. I know I've got a gap here, but at least now I understand I have a gap here, and I'm accepting that risk because I know that the cost of improving it might be not tenable for this year, or maybe the time frame for improving it might not be tenable for the most immediate need. So Braxton, talk about a little bit about some of the conversations you may have around, what's acceptable and improvement and those dynamics.
Yeah, it can be hard for SMBs, of course. And one of the biggest, I guess, not really an argument, but maybe a dissenting opinion that I often hear, when I'm talking about maturity and what controls you need to have is, we can't go to the same level of protection and security as a large organization can. And of course you can. I understand that. And the reality is that cybersecurity maturity is different for each business and each organization, because Dan talked about, what your limitations might be, what you can and can't do. And what he's referring to there is like kind of the context and like who you are and what you do. And what your cybersecurity budget looks like, what are your needs for your business. And again, cybersecurity is a part of business. So I consult very often with businesses and organizations, and I'm working with the leaders of those businesses. And as the leader of the business, they are also to be the leader of cybersecurity. So what does that look like? They need to make sure that you're mature for your size of your organization. You're doing what you can according to a world-renowned cybersecurity framework like Nist, and then just making sure you're doing your due diligence and due care. And having that risk management program that defines your risks, outlines what you need, what you don't have, what you need to have, and then making some sort of decision on that, whether it's maybe working with an insurance provider to transfer some of that risk, or remediating something to mitigate it, or just flat out accepting a risk, recognizing that it's there, but maybe you can't do anything about it right now, or you need it to be able to do what you need to do for your business. So again, just to kind of hammer this point home, really the only way you don't succeed in this is if you do nothing.
So when it comes to, planning and developing some of these concepts and ideas for your organization, when you're making, any sort of informed or educated decision, it's imperative to weigh some of these potential costs. So in the case of whether or not to implement, security plan, you should definitely weigh the costs behind each aspect of it. So Dan, we've got some statistics here that come directly from a Sophos study. Talk to us a little bit about what was seen for businesses, in 2021 who were hit with ransomware.
Yeah, so, the first slide that we showed that we were responding to, 80% of the time we're responding to ransomware incidents, right? And so we do a study every year on what we call the state of ransomware, and we have a third party go out and do a survey. Last year we had about just under 6,000 respondents. This is worldwide, so the numbers you're going to see are worldwide numbers, right? And what we ask is a number of questions, but and you could always, if you want to Google and look up the Sophos State of Ransomware 2022, you can get the report and see a lot more detail and everything. But I just wanted to pick the most important things out for our discussion today, which is, what's the cost of doing nothing, right? If you didn't do anything and if you were hit with a ransomware incident, what could you reasonably expect, right? Generally speaking, the average cost of a ransomware incident to clean up, and this is when I say clean up, it means from the moment that we know we've been hit to the moment that we're back to a normal working state and our business is back in to the good. Generally costs about $1.4 million over about a month on average. The average ransom that was actually paid was $888K. It's a weird number, but it's not an even number, but it's interesting to note that that number is fluid in that the threat actors know what they could maybe get away with sometimes because they know who they're targeting, and they can make it more affordable or less affordable, and they usually put some time limits in place to kind of submit a sense of urgency, like, hey, we'll give you a discount if you purchase within the next 24 hours. But then that price is going to go up after 24 hours. They want to, again, incentivize you to pay up front, incentivize you to not go through your normal incident response plan if you have one, and to just pay the ransom to get back up to good. Now, I mentioned $1.4 million is the cost to clean up. That includes things like, if you paid the ransom, if you didn't pay the ransom, the costs of hiring a third party to come on board and do the cleanup for you. But it doesn't track some other things. And Braxton, maybe you can comment towards this and, some of the hidden costs, it's been hit with like a ransomware type incident.
Yeah, so you're talking about some really nice clean empirical data here, some actual numbers, but and another thing about numbers is that it really makes it easy to understand and easy to gauge the impact of that. But let's talk about something that's hard to quantify. How much does it cost to be down for a month? Depends on the business, right? I know many businesses that can't go a month being down. They'll be done. They'll be dusted, or at least crippled if you're gone for a month. So the average recovery time hit with ransomware, for example, that could be a business closing venture. If you get hit with that, the reputation costs. Word gets out that you're not secure. Who's gonna want to work with you? Well, what's the potential cost and loss of the business that you're not going to earn as a result of that? And then, of course, your data. You might, again, kind of going back to the thing that I hear very often, well, we're small. Who cares about our data? You care about your data. You care about your data because you need your data to do what you need to do. So if you suddenly don't have access to that, what's the price point that you're putting on your data? You wouldn't sell it to somebody, right? You wouldn't sell your data. So what's the price point? That's just a question you need to ask. These are all things that are going to come up if you're hit with something like this. And if you have some sort of plan of action in place, whether it's technical controls that will help prevent you, something that will detect this as it's happening, or something that will just help you recover, because you need to treat it as when, not if. Because again, nothing's foolproof. So if you have a plan in place that protects you from when this happens, we will know what to do. We will be prepared. Then that really helps limit, or if in some cases almost completely eradicate these potential non-quantifiable costs.
And on that note, to kind of wrap up our discussion in sort of a nice bow, if you will, we want to offer some guidance on what businesses can do, even today, to better protect themselves from cyber threats. So, Dan, I'm going to let you take the lead with this slide. What key recommendations would you give to businesses to ramp up their security in 2022?
Yeah, and I like to put these into two buckets, right? We have, we call it strategic versus tactical, right? And if you're prior service military, right, you might understand the difference between strategic and tactical, but I'll explain real quick. Strategic is like your long-term game plan, right? Tactical is like your day-to-day, right? And so from a strategic perspective, Braxton has preached this, and I 100% agree. Layered protection. You don't want to have all your eggs in one basket from a protection perspective. You look at your tech stack, right? Email, network, endpoint, right? All three of those things need to be protected. And then combine that with a detection technology. Again, that stuff that will look at and bubble up the suspicious activity, and then have a team of people, whether that's internal or you look at a service to do this for you, that can look at that suspicious activity and do that analysis that you need to do to determine if this is good suspicious activity or bad suspicious activity. Educate and test your employees. Have an education plan, a long-term education plan for your employees. Your employees are Sometimes, very often, your weakest link, because they are the ones that are clicking on those things that they shouldn't be clicking on. They are the ones going to the sites that they shouldn't be going to. If you, you know, in conjunction with that, also make sure that you're hardening those users, right? And deploy multi-factor authentication and strong passwords. My recommendation for passwords is, I don't really care how complex the password is. If it's long enough, you can get away with less complexity. A longer password is stronger than a complex password, right? A 12-character password that was only letters is much stronger than an 8-character password with special symbols and a number with a capital versus a non-capital. So consider that when you're doing your password policy. One of the challenges that we run into with password policies, especially ones that require like a special character, stuff like that, is it's harder for users to do that. They very often resort to either using the same password for a number of things, so that's easier for them to remember, or they'll go with a phrase and then just use like numbers instead of a 1 instead of an I, or like a 3 instead of an E, right? And the problem with that is the threat actors know that, and so they have these dictionary type attacks that will use those types of things to break the password quicker. So a longer password is actually okay, and just have them type out a phrase. Have them use a password manager. I use a password manager. I've been using one for 3 years, and I will never go back to doing passwords the old way. I have 95% of the websites that I go to and 95% of the accounts that I have, I don't even know what my password is, because my password manager keeps my password all locked in sight. If I need to change a password, I know how to change it if I forget. And I know my master password. And by the way, my master password is 24 characters long. So ain't nobody going to get that. And then, on the strategic side, we talked about risk, and we talked about accepting risk. And it's not just about accepting risk, but then, that helps inform what you need to go to your cyber insurance carrier for. If you're not going to cyber insurance carriers already, you should be engaging with them and helping them understand, hey, here's where my concerns are about my risk. I need coverage for that. And that way you can, again, lessen the impact if you do have an incident. Now, Braxton, talk a little bit about the tactical stuff, the stuff that they should be doing kind of like every day and making sure they do on a regular basis.
Yeah, and this is in most cases, this is usually these are the tools that businesses will invest into, is the tactical defense. These are the cool things. These are the pretty things to look at. This is your cool firewalls, your AVs, all of that. And the strategic defense, that's your long term. That fits into your cybersecurity program, and that in some cases that's the boring stuff and hard to do. But you still need to do it. You need to do both of these things. But in terms of tactical defense, you need something that's going to monitor and respond to your alerts. You need real-time view into the data in your organization, in your business, because again, just talking, polymorphic viruses, as they're changing, there's no signature to them, so you need a good endpoint protection that is just as smart as the viruses and is actually paying attention to the behavior, to what these are doing. You need to know what you have and where it is. That's referring to your data and your mission critical business processes and applications, and who should have access. That is talking about the principle of least privilege. Is there anybody that has access into something that they shouldn't have? So very often when a hacker infiltrates the environment, it's as easy as an account that has elevated privileges in an area that it shouldn't, that gets cracked, and suddenly everything is gone. That is, in almost all cases that I've at least seen anecdotally, that is where that comes from. So privilege escalation is a huge threat. So making sure that you are locking down accounts to only what a service account needs or a user account needs for their job and their roles and responsibilities and duties is very important. And then we talked about backing up and configuring and patching. So for backing up, make sure that your data is protected. You need a place that you can recover from, because again, you need to treat it as a when, not if we are hit with ransomware. For example, ransomware has been the big topic we talked about. There are other attacks out there, but if you get hit with ransomware, you need to be able to recover from that. And then configuring, making sure that your systems and your workstations are configured to internationally known cybersecurity standards and practices. And then patching, we talked about patching a little bit and zero-day vulnerabilities. your applications are a risk. Your assets are exposed to risk due to the applications that are installed on them. So making sure that they're patched, making sure that your operating systems are patched is going to be invaluable, because an attacker is going to try and exploit and pivot off of those vulnerabilities that might be on your assets. And then, of course, you have all of these things in place. You have your strategic defense, you have your tactical defense, you set up your configurations, and everything's, neat and proper. And is that it? No, you have to actually go back and look and check on it every once in a while, because the needs of the businesses change. So you're going to set things up to the way that you need them, but in a year, maybe, you may not need a specific account anymore. You may not need an account to have that level of privilege anymore. You may not even need that application anymore. So you do need to kind of periodically go, whether it's annually, biannually, even quarterly, depending on what it is that you're looking at, going back and making sure that what we set up and the way we define this still makes sense and is what we expected. So all of this has to happen.
And that is a perfect segue into our next discussion point. Something that's not unique to the security and tech industry by any means, or assessment. So you need it when you're, going to buy a home. You need it for insurance, annual physical exams. Assessments happen in a number of different ways. So for businesses, though, to get a better idea of your areas of potential cybersecurity risk, an assessment is key. So, Dan, what should a risk assessment entail?
Yeah, what it should be is you should be asking the questions kind of in this one slide that we had about risk, understanding what you have, how you're protecting it, how you detect things that's suspicious, how you handle the data that you detect, and then ultimately how you recover. So those are the 5 pillars of the Nist cybersecurity framework. Okay, and that's why we look at that as kind of our Bible from our perspective of conforming to a specific set of standards. It really is a nice thing, because it helps us understand the questions that need to be asked, because as Braxton mentioned before, you don't know what you don't know, and sometimes you don't even know what questions you need to ask sometimes. So having a framework in place helps guide you through that. It doesn't have to be 100%. You don't have to go to every single point in the NIST framework one by one and make sure you have an answer to those things, but you should at least understand these 5 pillars and some of the subsections of those 5 pillars, and where you stand in each one. And you should do it periodically. We recommend every year you should be doing an assessment. Obviously, we understand, that might not be tenable, right? You might want to look at every 18 months, maybe every 2 years, right? You might want to require that you do this every 6 months. But on average, we recommend you do it once a year. So Braxton, talk a little bit about what we've developed with NetGain and Sophos to help your clients to do these assessments.
Yeah, so we've got an assessment questionnaire that's built off of this, the cybersecurity framework, and it's going to encompass those 5 pillars that Dan has referred to. So if you're not certain on where you are, you're not an expert on cybersecurity, that's totally fine. That's what Dan and I are here for. That's what we do. So you can come and talk to us. We've got an assessment questionnaire that'll kind of run you through all forms of the risk assessment gaps that we would expect and look through, and kind of determine that maturity. So again, if you're kind of curious on where you are and where you stand, you can have a discussion with us and we'll walk you through that. And this is like Dan was referring to, every 12 to 18 months, we should be kind of going through this. It's cyclical. It's risk management. It should be a part of your business processes, and that's going to work with, maybe you're designing your cybersecurity budget again for the year. If you've got a recent risk assessment and you know where you stand and where your gaps are, and you've had internal discussions on how to prioritize that, you'll know, what maybe you need to allocate or not allocate, and strengthen and improve from there. So we want to help you. We're here to help, and we have this kind of free assessment that we can run through with you, and you'll be ready and prepared for your next steps.
Thank you for that, Braxton. Yeah, we've covered quite a lot of ground in this webinar, and I want to take this moment now to kind of pause and let our speakers kind of regroup, maybe catch a breath and get some water. And I'm going to share a quick poll with everyone. And this is also going to be a time where I'm going to look through some of your questions and comments that have come in too. So we've had a couple of questions that have come through. Sort those. I'll give everyone a little bit longer to answer the poll. A few more sections. Let's see, a few more seconds. Sorry. Okay, wrapping that up, and we're back. So let's now take a few minutes. Yeah, we are good on time, so hopefully we can answer all of these that have come in. Let's see. So here is one. Let me see. Where should we start? We haven't done an evaluation of any sort, but we know we probably need help. So the fact that you're even asking that question, I think is good. Dan, I'm gonna toss this to you first. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you know, we just talked about on the last slide, you know, the assessment, the risk assessment that we do, the Nist based assessment. Just to give you an idea, it takes about a half an hour to go through the questionnaires. You know, we have two assessments. We have a basic and an advanced, right? I would recommend we start with the basic, just because if you've never started anywhere, just do the basic one. You don't have to, you know, the advanced one has about double the amount of questions, takes about an hour and a half. So in the interest of just getting a lay of the land, right, let's do a basic assessment. It takes about a half an hour, and you'll have a much better idea after you've run through it once as to, you know, hey, here's what I need to be diving into a little bit more in the future, right? And it gives you a little bit more of a groundwork to work from, a little bit more of a foothold to work from.
Thank you for that, Dan. Okay, another question I'm going to toss out. How can we defend ourselves from supply chain attacks? How far down the chain do I need to go to monitor threat activity? Braxton, I'm going to toss this question to you since Dan took the last one.
You kind of cut out a little bit for me, Caroline. Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Yes, I can. How can we defend ourselves from supply chain attacks? How far down the chain do I need to go to monitor threat activity? Did you hear me that time?
Yes, thank you. I think it was my end, sorry. Vendor management. So this is it's a principle, it's a control that you should have in your business. Obviously, you know, most everybody is using a third-party vendor for some sort of service or application. So you know, as the leader of your business, you know, how are you making sure that what they're doing is right and proper? So kind of checking in with them. In a lot of cases, the vendor will have something like a, you know, some sort of certification or accreditation, like NetGain, for instance. You know, we have a SOC 2 Type 2 report that in some cases we have handed out to kind of show that, like, yes, we are, you know, doing what we're supposed to be doing. You know, through a given period of time, you know, we have this, that in place for controls, and you know, we are making sure that we're trying to do right by you. And you should be kind of holding your other vendors to that same kind of test. So as far as how far you go, you know, you can kind of play, you know, that game, the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon or 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, like, or you get on Wikipedia, like how far, you know, pick any topic and click through links, you know, how quickly can you get to Kevin Bacon? You don't need to go to your vendor's vendor and your vendor's vendor's vendor, just your immediate vendors, whoever has direct access into your environment, and you kind of work with them directly through a working relationship. That's as far as you need to go. Outside of that, you've done your due care and your due diligence.
Thank you for that, Braxton. Okay, we've got another question that came in. If a victim of ransomware where you are completely down, how does the perp communicate with the business to get the money, unlock, etc.?
I would take that one. That's a great question. And honestly, what we're seeing nowadays is not ransomware that takes your whole business down for that specific purpose, right? The threat actors don't want to take you down to the point where you cannot pay, right? What we saw in the early days of ransomware were those types of really, like, I'm going to lock you out of your whole system. and the only method to pay was there was a phone number you could call to access a hotline, basically, right? What we're seeing now with ransomware is they're specifically targeting just maybe file data, or maybe your databases, or maybe your critical applications, but they're not taking your whole business down. They're still giving you an avenue to be, quote unquote, up and running at a very basic level, but without the critical components of your business that you need to operate, in a money making way for you, but you could still have access to your email and your email systems, so they can communicate via email. You still have access to your internet, so that you can communicate to their websites and go on their support site, quote unquote support site, because that's what they offer. But in some extreme cases, we do still see ransomware where they're targeting a whole environment and knocking everything out, and they still do. Again, they offer, there's basically an 800 number that they give you to call in and access a live QA agent, basically, that can help route you and get your unlock code and things like that. I will just preface this and say, please don't pay the ransom, people. Don't encourage this if you can. Obviously, our discussion today is hopefully helping you prepare for that inevitability, so that you have an action plan in place. That action plan should never be pay the ransom. We've found that, yes, there is a propensity to get your data back when you pay a ransom, but it's still only about 65 to 70% of the time. So you're paying the ransom and then you're not getting your data back 30% of the time on average. That's something you're gonna have to deal with. And our recommendation always is never to pay the ransom.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you wanted to weigh in on that question at all. We're kind of closing in on our time, so I'm gonna wrap things up. Any final comments from you all?
No, Dan covered that. The funny thing about ransomware is they're going to make sure that you have some way of paying them. So they will give you their details, whatever number, email, Bitcoin address that they want you to send to them. So.
Yeah, there was a question about password managers. So just, since we're at the last end here, I know there was a question about just asking me which password manager I use personally, and do I have a preference for personal use versus business use of password managers? I don't have a preference. I used to use LastPass. So if you're familiar with LastPass, and that is actually probably a better one for businesses, because they have more corporate kind of use, and guidelines and things like that, like corporate management of password manager. But when LastPass started charging for their free tier, I moved over to a different one. So for my personal use, I use a product called Bitwarden, which is more open source password manager. So depending on your level of expertise, that may actually also be better for your business too, if you want to integrate that into. But between Bitwarden and LastPass, I don't have a favorite necessarily. It's just have one. Just have one, and have one that's that you're comfortable with using is more important than a personal preference.
Yeah, and I'll echo the vendor agnostic view on that. As long as you're using one, it's fine. But I will say, if you're thinking about using one for your business, pay attention to whether or not what's missing from whatever free version they're offering to a licensed version, because that licensed version is going to have security features that you're probably going to want to have, like, for example, multi-factor authentication, making sure that there's that second level of authentication behind when someone logs in to their password vault or what have you. So if you're thinking about using it for your business or your enterprise, it's probably worth it to spend at least a little bit of money to get that security feature.
Thank you guys for that. We are wrapping up right on time. So quick closure, huge thank you to Braxton and Dan for all the information and guidance that they shared today around cybersecurity. Hopefully everybody found this webinar informative and helpful and had some good takeaways. A quick reminder, we're going to be sharing the details around this webinar in an email soon with a link to the recording and additional information. So look for that to be shared within the next couple to few days. And with that, I'm going to close the webinar, and I hope everyone has a great Thursday. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.